My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. Do not let this message pass your eyes as though it were meant for someone else. There are moments that arrive without warning, moments that quietly divide the story of a life into a before and an after. This is one of those moments. You did not reach these words by accident. Whether you understand it now or not, your heart has been searching for something it could not name, and today it has paused here for a reason. There is a truth moving toward you that has been hidden beneath silence, misunderstanding, and time itself. Heaven has watched every tear you refused to show, every night you convinced yourself to stay strong, every moment you smiled while carrying questions no one else could hear. Nothing has escaped my sight. Not the prayers whispered into your pillow. Not the hopes you buried because disappointment had become too familiar. Not even the dream you stopped speaking aloud because you feared believing again would only bring more pain. Listen carefully, my child, because what I am about to reveal is wrapped in mystery. There is someone whose heart has carried your name far longer than you realize. Their emotions were never as small as they appeared. What looked like distance was not always indifference. What seemed like silence was not always the absence of love. There were battles inside them that no human eye could fully understand. You have replayed certain memories over and over, wondering if you imagined the connection. You questioned whether those brief glances meant anything. You wondered why certain encounters lingered in your spirit long after everyone else had forgotten them. The answer has been growing quietly, even while you believed nothing was happening. Do not rush ahead. The story is still unfolding. There came a day when your soulmate stood surrounded by voices, expectations, and fear. Their heart had reached a place where remaining silent became heavier than speaking the truth. Every hidden emotion pressed against the walls they had built around themselves. Every memory of you returned with greater strength than before. The world saw someone trying to remain composed, but heaven saw a soul standing on the edge of surrender. You never knew how many times they almost spoke. You never knew how often your name reached their lips before they stopped themselves. You never knew how close the truth came to changing everything. There are moments in every destiny when courage and fear stand face to face. This was one of those moments. They looked around and realized that pretending no longer brought peace. The weight of unspoken love had become impossible to carry. But before you discover what happened next, you must understand something even deeper. Love that is guided by heaven is rarely simple. It is refined through waiting. It is tested through uncertainty. It grows stronger in seasons when nothing seems to move. While you thought the silence meant the story had ended, heaven was writing chapters you could not yet read. There were conversations you never heard. There were tears you never witnessed. There were prayers offered in your name when you believed you had been forgotten. Your soulmate carried a secret that became impossible to hide. Every ordinary day reminded them of you. Every familiar place awakened another memory. Even when they tried to convince themselves to move on, something inside refused to let go. That is why today feels different. Something has shifted. The atmosphere around your story is no longer the same. The delay was never the denial you feared. What happened next became so unexpected that even those standing nearby could not have predicted it. The walls around their heart began to crack. The fear of judgment started losing its power. The desire to speak the truth became stronger than the desire to protect themselves. Still, heaven waited. Because timing matters. Not every confession is meant for every season. Not every revelation arrives the moment people demand it. The greatest moments often appear after patience has nearly reached its limit. So remain attentive, my child. Do not let disappointment become the author of your future. Do not assume that silence has written the final sentence. Some stories become extraordinary precisely because they seemed impossible only moments before everything changed. Right now, unseen pieces are moving into place. Conversations are approaching. Hearts are softening. Old fears are losing their strength. The story you thought was fading has not disappeared. It has been preparing for a moment that neither you nor your soulmate could create on your own. Yet there is one detail. One breathtaking detail. It is the very reason this message found you today. The instant your soulmate finally could no longer contain what had lived inside for so long, something happened in front of everyone, something that left the people around them completely stunned. But you are not ready to hear the full truth just yet. Because what happened after those first words changed everything. The room did not become silent all at once. First, one voice disappeared. Then another. A laugh that had been moving through the crowd stopped halfway. A glass paused near someone's lips. A conversation near the doorway faded into nothing. Even the people who had not been paying attention turned their heads, because something in the air had changed before your soulmate said a single clear word. And then they spoke your name. Not quietly. Not carefully. Not in the guarded tone they had used whenever someone asked about you before. They said it as though your name had been trapped inside their chest for too long and had finally broken free. Every face turned toward them. Some looked surprised. Some looked confused. One person immediately understood. But your soulmate did not look at any of them. Their eyes were fixed on something beyond the crowd, as if they were no longer speaking only to the people standing there. They were speaking to every fear that had silenced them. Every misunderstanding that had separated you. Every moment they had pretended they felt nothing. Their voice trembled at first. But they did not stop. I love them. Those were the words. Simple words. Yet nothing about the moment was simple. Because they did not say them with uncertainty. They did not say them as a confession they might take back. They said them with the force of someone who had reached the end of hiding. I love them, they repeated, louder this time. I have tried not to. I have tried to convince myself that I could forget. I have tried to act as though it meant less than it did. But I cannot keep lying. The people around them were stunned. A few exchanged glances. Someone whispered their name, trying to calm them. Someone else told them this was not the place. But your soulmate turned toward that voice with tears already forming in their eyes. No, they said. This is exactly the place. Because I have spent too long waiting for the perfect place, the perfect moment, the perfect courage. And every time I waited, I lost another chance. That sentence came from deeper than anyone realized. It carried every regret they had hidden. Every time they watched you walk away and said nothing. Every time they opened a message and stared at your name but could not find the courage to respond honestly. Every time they let pride speak louder than their heart. Every time fear convinced them that silence was safer. Heaven had witnessed all of it. And now, in front of everyone, the silence was ending. Pause here for a moment, because this is where the truth becomes bigger than the confession itself. Your soulmate did not only admit that they loved you. They admitted why they had hidden it. And the reason was not what most people expected. They took a breath and looked around the room. Their hands were trembling. Their face showed the pain of someone finally opening a door they had kept locked for too long. "I was afraid," they said. The crowd remained still. "I was afraid they would see the parts of me I still do not know how to heal. I was afraid they would realize they deserved better. I was afraid that if I let myself love them completely, I would lose them completely." Someone near them lowered their eyes. Because those words were not only a confession. They were an exposure. Your soulmate was revealing the wound beneath the distance. They had not run because they felt nothing. They had run because they felt too much. They had not remained silent because you were unimportant. They had remained silent because your importance frightened them. You touched something inside them that no one else had reached. You made them imagine a future they had stopped believing was possible. You made them feel seen in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. And when a heart has spent years protecting itself, being truly seen can feel more frightening than being alone. That is what you could not understand before. You thought their withdrawal meant rejection. You thought their hesitation meant uncertainty about you. You thought the unanswered questions were proof that the connection had mattered only to you. But the truth was more complicated. They had been fighting themselves. Every time they moved closer, fear reminded them of an old betrayal. Every time they imagined telling you the truth, pride told them they would look weak. Every time they thought of reaching out, they remembered a past moment when vulnerability had been used against them. And so they chose distance. Not because distance felt good. Because distance felt familiar. There is a difference. A painful difference. Familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar love. That was the prison they had lived inside. But something had begun changing long before that public confession. At first, it was subtle. A dream in which they saw you walking away while they tried to call your name. A song that appeared at the exact moment they were thinking of you. A place connected to you that suddenly felt impossible to avoid. A conversation with someone who unknowingly repeated words you had once said. Again and again, your memory returned. Not as punishment. As awakening. Their soul was being forced to face what their mind kept trying to deny. There was one night in particular. A night you knew nothing about. They were alone, surrounded by darkness, holding the weight of every decision they had made. They had spent the day pretending to be fine. They answered messages. They smiled when expected. They participated in ordinary conversations. But when the world became quiet, the truth rose. They missed you. Not casually. Not temporarily. They missed the way you understood what they could not explain. They missed the peace they felt near you. They missed the version of themselves that appeared when you were present. And in that silence, they finally admitted something they had resisted for a long time. Losing you had not protected them. It had only made them realize how deeply connected they had become. They whispered your name into the darkness. No one heard it on earth. But heaven did. That was the first crack in the wall. The second came days later when someone asked them a question they were not prepared to answer. Have you ever truly loved someone? They tried to laugh. They tried to avoid it. But your face appeared in their mind before they could stop it. And everyone nearby noticed the change in their expression. One person asked, "Who are you thinking about?" Your soulmate denied it. But the denial was weak. Their eyes had already revealed too much. That conversation stayed with them. Because once the truth begins rising, it becomes difficult to bury again. They started noticing how often they compared others to you. How every new connection felt incomplete. How conversations with other people lacked the depth they remembered with you. How no one else made time feel the same. They tried to call it nostalgia. They tried to tell themselves they missed an idea, not a person. But the heart knows the difference. And their heart knew you. Still, they resisted. Because accepting love meant accepting responsibility. They would have to acknowledge the ways they hurt you. They would have to confront the silence they allowed. They would have to admit that some of your pain was created by their fear. That realization was difficult. It was easier to miss you privately than to face what restoring the connection might require. But heaven was not allowing them to remain comfortable in avoidance. You had prayed for clarity. You had asked for truth. You had wondered whether you should release the connection forever. And while you were trying to decide whether the door had closed, the other side of that door was beginning to shake. Your soulmate became restless. They could no longer enjoy distractions the way they once had. Things that used to help them avoid their emotions stopped working. Crowded rooms made them feel lonely. Laughter felt temporary. Success felt incomplete. Even peaceful moments carried the quiet question of what might have happened if they had been honest with you. This is where destiny became impossible to ignore. Because one morning, they woke with a certainty they could not explain. Something had to change. They did not know how. They did not know when. But they knew they could not continue living as though your story had meant nothing. They began preparing words. At first, only in their mind. I am sorry. I should have told you. I was afraid. I still think about you. I never stopped caring. They imagined your response. Sometimes they imagined anger. Sometimes silence. Sometimes tears. Sometimes forgiveness. Every possibility frightened them. But none frightened them as much as the thought of never telling you at all. That fear became stronger each day. And then came the gathering. The moment in front of everyone. It had not been planned as a confession. That is what makes what happened so extraordinary. Your soulmate did not arrive intending to expose their heart. They had promised themselves they would remain calm. They would stay quiet. They would leave before the subject of you came up. But someone mentioned your name. Casually. Almost carelessly. That one name changed everything. Your soulmate froze. A person in the crowd made a remark about you. They suggested you had moved on. They said perhaps you had never cared as deeply as your soulmate believed. Another person laughed and said it was probably for the best. The words entered the room like sparks near dry grass. Your soulmate tried to ignore them. They lowered their eyes. They clenched their jaw. But then someone said something else. Something unfair. Something that made your soulmate feel as though your heart, your intentions, and your love were being reduced to a story that was not true. And that was the moment they could not remain silent. They stood up. The movement was sudden enough to stop several conversations. They looked directly at the person who had spoken. "You do not know them," they said. The room shifted. Their voice was controlled, but emotion was rising beneath it. "You do not know what they gave. You do not know how patient they were. You do not know how many chances they offered me." No one interrupted. Your soulmate continued. "They were not the one who failed to care. I was the one who was afraid." There it was. The first public truth. A truth they had hidden even from some of the people closest to them. Someone told them they did not need to explain. But they shook their head. "Yes, I do." Their eyes filled with tears. "Because I let people believe the wrong story. I let them think I walked away because it did not matter. I let them think I was fine. I let them think I had forgotten." Their voice broke. "I did not forget." The silence became heavier. They looked around the room as though daring anyone to deny what came next. "I remember everything." They remembered the first moment they realized you were different. The way your presence calmed them even when their life felt chaotic. The way you listened without trying to control them. The way you noticed small changes in their mood. The way you could sense when they were pretending to be fine. The way you encouraged them when they had stopped encouraging themselves. They remembered a conversation that lasted longer than either of you expected. A moment when the world seemed to disappear and only honesty remained. They remembered your laughter. They remembered the softness in your eyes. They remembered the last time you looked at them before the distance grew. And most painfully, they remembered the question hidden in your expression. Will you choose me, or will you choose your fear? At the time, they chose fear. Now, in front of everyone, they admitted it. I chose fear, they said. And I have regretted it every day. A tear moved down their face. They did not wipe it away. This mattered. Because your soulmate was someone who had often hidden emotion quickly. They had learned to treat vulnerability like danger. But in that moment, they allowed everyone to see the truth. The crowd was no longer watching a dramatic confession. They were witnessing a transformation. The person who had spent so long avoiding love was standing inside it without protection. And then they raised their voice. Not in anger. In desperation. I love them. The words echoed. I love them, and I do not care who knows anymore. That was the scream. Not merely a loud declaration. It was the sound of years of fear breaking apart. It was the sound of pride losing its control. It was the sound of a heart choosing truth after too long in hiding. Some people in the room were shocked because they had never seen this side of your soulmate. Others had suspected the truth but never expected them to admit it. One person began crying quietly. Another looked toward the door, almost as though expecting you to appear. But you were not there. At least, not physically. And this absence made the moment even more painful. Because after declaring their love in front of everyone, your soulmate looked around as if the force of those words might somehow bring you into the room. For a brief moment, their face showed hope. Then reality returned. You had not heard them. You had not seen what they had finally done. They had found their courage too late for you to witness it. Or so they believed. But heaven wastes nothing. Every truth spoken in sincerity creates movement. Every wall that falls changes what becomes possible. That public confession was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the next stage. Your soulmate sat down slowly. Their breathing was uneven. Someone approached them and placed a hand on their shoulder. Another asked whether they wanted to leave. They said no. Because there was still something they needed to say. The room waited. Your soulmate looked down at their hands. I owe them more than a confession, they said. Those words changed the tone again. Until then, everyone thought the moment had reached its peak. They were wrong. The greatest revelation had not yet been spoken. Your soulmate admitted that love alone was not enough. They understood that saying, I love you, could not erase the hurt. They understood that longing did not automatically create trust. They understood that missing you was not the same as being ready to love you well. This awareness had not come easily. It had been formed through regret. Through loneliness. Through watching the consequences of their choices. Through recognizing patterns they could no longer blame on others. I do not want to return to their life only because I am lonely, they said. I want to return differently. The people around them listened more carefully. I want to be honest. I want to take responsibility. I want to stop running every time love asks me to grow. This was not the person you remembered. At least, not entirely. Something had matured. Something had softened. Something had finally understood the cost of emotional avoidance. But do not mistake awakening for completion. Your soulmate still has fears. They still have habits to break. They still have wounds that require honesty and patience. The transformation is real, but it is unfolding. And that is why you must not rush toward the story before truth reaches you clearly. This message is not asking you to abandon wisdom. It is not asking you to ignore what hurt. It is not asking you to accept words without action. Real love does not demand that you betray yourself. Real love does not ask you to return to confusion. Real love must learn to stand in the light. Your soulmate's confession was powerful. But what they decided to do afterward is what may change everything. After the gathering ended, the room emptied slowly. People spoke in whispers. Some wanted to discuss what they had witnessed. Others gave your soulmate space. The person who had made the careless comment about you approached and apologized. Your soulmate nodded, but their mind was elsewhere. They were thinking about you. They walked outside alone. The night air touched their face. Their heart was still racing. For the first time, they had spoken the truth without protecting themselves from how others might react. Yet the one person who needed to hear it most was not there. They took out their phone. Your name was still saved. Of course it was. They had never deleted it. There were moments when they had considered doing so, believing that removing your name might weaken the connection. But they could not. Your contact remained like a door they were afraid to open. Their thumb hovered over it. They opened the conversation. Old messages appeared. Words from another time. Some gentle. Some painful. Some filled with hope. Some carrying the early signs of distance. They scrolled slowly. Every line reminded them of what they had received and what they had failed to return. There was one message from you that they had read many times. A message in which you had not begged. You had not blamed. You had simply asked for honesty. At the time, they did not know how to give it. Now that message felt like a mirror. They whispered, "You deserved an answer." The screen blurred through their tears. They began typing. The first message was long. Too long. They wrote everything. They described the confession. They apologized for the silence. They admitted their fear. They told you they still loved you. Then they deleted it. Not because the words were false. Because suddenly they feared that sending too much might overwhelm you. They tried again. "I need to tell you something." They stared at the sentence. Deleted it. Again. "I am sorry." Deleted. Again. "Can we talk?" This time they did not delete it immediately. Their thumb hovered above the send button. Their breathing became shallow. One touch could open the door. One touch could also reveal that you had closed it. This was the moment courage had to become action. It is easy to confess love in a room where the beloved is absent. It is harder to place that truth directly into the hands of the person who can accept or reject it. Your soulmate knew this. That is why the next few seconds felt longer than the entire gathering. They looked upward. Not dramatically. Not with perfect words. They simply whispered, "Please help me do this right." Heaven heard. But the answer was not a force that moved their finger. They still had to choose. Divine guidance does not remove human responsibility. It illuminates the next step. And the next step was honesty. They pressed send. The message left their phone. 3 words entered the space between you. "Can we talk?" Nothing happened at first. No immediate reply. No sign that you had seen it. Your soulmate stared at the screen. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 10. The confidence they had found in front of everyone began to weaken. Questions rushed in. What if you ignored them? What if you had blocked them? What if you had truly moved on? What if the door had closed forever? Busy. Away from your phone. But fear does not wait for facts. It creates its own story. Your soulmate began pacing. They almost sent another message. They almost wrote, "Please answer." But they stopped. Because they remembered something important. For too long, they had controlled the pace of the connection through silence. They disappeared when emotions became intense. They returned when loneliness became stronger. They expected you to remain available while they decided what they wanted. Now they understood that love required patience from them. You were allowed to take time. You were allowed to protect your peace. You were allowed to decide whether their words deserved a response. That realization humbled them. They put the phone down. Then picked it up again moments later. Still nothing. Hours passed. They returned home with a heart full of uncertainty. The confession that had felt liberating now left them exposed. But this exposure was necessary. For the first time, they were experiencing the waiting you had known. The wondering. The silence. The fear of not knowing what the other person felt. It was not punishment. It was understanding. Sometimes growth begins when a person finally feels the emotional weight they once placed on someone else. That night, your soulmate did not sleep. They replayed the gathering. They wondered whether telling everyone had been foolish. They wondered whether they had acted too late. They wondered whether the message had reached you at the wrong time. Yet beneath all of those fears, one truth remained steady. They did not regret telling the truth. That alone was evidence of change. The old version of them would have awakened ashamed. They would have denied the confession. They might have told everyone they were emotional or confused. But this time, they stood by every word. The next morning, someone from the gathering called. They asked whether your soulmate meant what they had said. Yes, your soulmate answered without hesitation. Then what are you going to do? Your soulmate looked toward the silent phone. I am going to show them. Not convince. Not pressure. Not chase in panic. Show. Through consistency. Through patience. Through accountability. Through actions that could support the words. This was the beginning of something deeper. But there was still no response from you. The day moved slowly. Every notification made their heart jump. None of them came from you. By evening, they began accepting that perhaps you had chosen silence. They sat in the same place where they had once ignored one of your messages. The memory was painful. They understood now how silence can feel like an answer even when no answer has been given. And then, at the moment they had almost stopped checking, the screen lit up. Your name appeared. Their entire body froze. They did not open the message immediately. For several seconds, they simply stared. The name they had whispered, defended, and cried over was glowing before them. They reached for the phone with shaking hands. Your message was not long. It did not contain a declaration. It did not erase the past. It asked one question. Why now? Those two words entered their heart more deeply than anger might have. Because your question carried everything. Why now, after all the silence? Why now, after I learned to live without answers? Why now, when I had finally begun gathering the pieces of myself? Why now, when you could have chosen honesty before the damage was done? Your soulmate read the question repeatedly. They knew there was no simple answer. They could not blame timing. They could not blame circumstances. They could not hide behind confusion anymore. So they began typing the truth. Because I was a coward before. They paused. Then continued. Because I thought silence would protect me, but it only hurt you and made me lose the person I loved. Because I finally understand that what I felt was never temporary. Because today someone spoke about you as though you were the reason things ended, and I could not let that lie stand anymore. They told you about the gathering. They told you they had said your name. They told you they had confessed in front of everyone. But they did not use the public confession to pressure you. They wrote, "You do not owe me anything because I finally told the truth." That sentence mattered. It showed the beginning of respect. Then came the line that made your heart stop for a moment. I screamed that I loved you, but I know the person I should have told first was you. You read it once. Then again. The words stirred emotions you had worked hard to quiet. Part of you wanted to believe. Part of you remembered the pain. Part of you wanted to ask everything at once. Part of you wanted to close the conversation and protect the peace you had rebuilt. Heaven saw the conflict inside you. You were not cold. You were cautious. There is a difference. Your heart still carried love, but it also carried memory. You knew how beautiful the connection could feel. You also knew how deeply uncertainty had wounded you. You did not want another temporary return. You did not want another emotional confession followed by distance. You needed more than a dramatic moment. You needed truth that could remain true after the emotion faded. So you asked another question. What exactly do you want from me? Your soulmate stared at the message. This was where old patterns might have returned. They might have said, I do not know. They might have avoided the question. They might have offered a vague answer about seeing where things went. But something stronger had awakened. I want the chance to apologize properly, they wrote. I want the chance to listen to what my silence did to you. I want to rebuild trust if you ever decide that is possible. And I want to love you honestly, not secretly, not halfway, and not only when fear allows me. Your breath caught. Because those were the words you had once prayed to hear. Yet hearing them now did not automatically resolve everything. Sometimes the answer arrives after the heart has changed. Sometimes the door reopens only after you have learned not to stand helplessly outside it. You had grown. You were no longer willing to abandon yourself to keep someone close. And heaven was proud of this. Your growth was not meant to make you hard. It was meant to make you discerning. You could love and still require honesty. You could forgive and still move slowly. You could hear their confession without handing them immediate access to every part of you. The next message you sent reflected this. Words are not enough anymore. Your soulmate closed their eyes. The sentence hurt. But they knew it was true. I know, they replied. No argument. No manipulation. No attempt to make you feel guilty. Only acceptance. Then they wrote something unexpected. Tell me what safety would look like to you. That question opened a space neither of you had entered before. For so long, the connection had revolved around emotion. Attraction. Longing. Fear. Timing. But now the conversation was moving toward something more mature. Safety. Consistency. Responsibility. You took time before answering. You thought about what you needed. Clear communication. No disappearing. No half-truths. No hidden connection. No return that depended only on loneliness. No promises made in emotion and forgotten in comfort. You told them. And your soulmate did not become defensive. They did not accuse you of asking too much. They read each point slowly. Then they answered, you should have had those things from the beginning. That response softened something inside you. Not completely. But enough to keep the conversation open. The exchange continued into the night. You asked difficult questions. They answered some immediately. Others required time. There were moments when the truth was painful. There were details that confirmed suspicions you had tried to silence. There were also revelations that showed how deeply they had struggled. But something was different now. They were no longer trying to appear perfect. They were trying to be honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, began clearing the fog. Yet there was one thing they did not tell you. One final truth. A truth connected to the gathering. A truth that would explain why the confession happened on that exact day. They almost revealed it several times. You noticed pauses in their replies. You sensed there was more. Finally, you asked, "What are you not telling me?" The question appeared on their screen. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. They had hoped to wait. They wanted to tell you in person. They feared that written words would not carry the weight of what had happened. But you had asked directly. And they had promised not to hide anymore. Their fingers moved slowly. There is something else. You waited. The typing symbol appeared. Then disappeared. Appeared again. Your heart began beating faster. The message finally arrived. Someone came to me before the gathering. You stared at the words. Who? There was another pause. When the reply appeared, it contained a name you did not expect. A name tied to the past. A name connected to the very misunderstanding that had separated you. Your soulmate continued. They told me the truth about what happened. In that instant, everything inside you became still. Because for months, perhaps longer, you had carried the pain of being misunderstood. You had sensed that someone had interfered. A conversation had been twisted. An intention had been misrepresented. A moment had been used to create distance. But you never had proof. Now your soulmate was telling you that the truth had finally surfaced. You asked, "What truth?" They did not answer immediately. Instead, they wrote, "I need you to understand that when I heard it, I realized I had judged you for something you never did." Your eyes filled with tears. Not only because the truth was emerging. Because of all the time lost beneath a lie. Every night you questioned yourself. Every moment you wondered whether you had failed. Every time you wished you could explain but were never given the chance. The burden had never belonged to you. Your soulmate knew that now. "I am sorry," they wrote. "I believed them because believing them was easier than facing how much I loved you." This confession hurt in a different way. It was honest. But honesty does not erase consequence. You asked again, "What did they tell you?" The typing symbol returned. Then stopped. Your soulmate was struggling to write it. Because the truth was not only about the past. It was about what was happening now. It involved the person who had created the misunderstanding. It involved a hidden motive. And it involved a decision made recently that could alter your future. Finally, the message arrived. They admitted they wanted us apart. You read the sentence again and again. A chill moved through you. Why? Your soulmate replied, "Because they knew what I felt for you before I was ready to admit it." There was more. You could feel it. The confession at the gathering had not been triggered only by someone speaking unfairly about you. It had been triggered by the revelation that your separation had been influenced deliberately. Someone had watched the connection grow. Someone had recognized its depth. Someone had feared what your union might change. And rather than allowing truth to unfold, they planted doubt. They told your soulmate that you had said things you never said. They suggested your intentions were not sincere. They presented selective details. They took moments out of context. They turned fear into certainty. And because your soulmate was already afraid of vulnerability, the lie found fertile ground. This does not remove their responsibility. They should have asked you. They should have trusted the connection enough to seek clarity. They should have spoken directly rather than disappearing. They know this now. But the hidden interference explains the sudden collapse you never understood. The shift that seemed too sharp. The distance that appeared without a clear reason. The coldness that followed moments of closeness. You had been fighting an invisible story. And now that story was being exposed. You asked the only question that mattered. Why would they admit it now? Your soulmate's answer took longer than before. When it came, it opened an even greater mystery. Because they are afraid you are about to discover something else. Your hands went cold. What? No response. 1 minute passed. Then another. You watched the typing symbol appear and disappear. Your soulmate wanted to tell you. But before they could, another message entered the conversation. Not from them. From an unknown number. The message contained no greeting. No explanation. Only a single photograph. You opened it. And the moment you saw what was in that image, the story you thought you understood broke open all over again.